Welcome back to Music 239. Today we start with Chapter 5, which is Central and Eastern Europe, particularly including Poland, but also some from Bulgaria and some from Bosnia. So we're going to look at those three countries, specifically looking at Poland to start with. So in your text you'll find maps showing you the locations that we're looking at here. So if you want to look at Chapter 5, which starts on page 205, you can see the map of Europe, and specifically the section that not only of Poland here, but also then down to the south you'll see Bosnia, and then down to the southeast you'll see Bulgaria, and those three places are where the music will come from in this unit. Poland is a very interesting country, and I had the chance to go there when I was in high school with a choir from my school that went there, and I'll tell you more about that as time went on. So I had the chance in the summer of 1975 to go on tour of southern Poland, specifically to some of the towns that are referred to in your text. And then I got a chance to go back there in the year 2000 again, and it was like night and day, the difference, because in 1975 Poland was still under communist regime, and then in 2000 Solidarity had happened and new governments, and things were quite a bit different. So quite a change politically during that 25-year span from 75 to 2000. We're going to see the influence of three different religions in the music that we're going to look at. First of all, Judaism, then Christianity, and then Islam. And your PowerPoint shows you some of the influences that you can expect those religions to bring to the music that we're looking at. So first of all, Judaism and klezmer. Does anybody know what klezmer is? You run into that before? Yes? What is it? Somebody give me a quick definition of klezmer.
It's usually used for like dance music celebrations.
Right.
Yeah.
Dance music, celebrations. What instruments are usually involved in klezmer?
Lots of clarinet, accordion,
Yes, usually there's a clarinet, usually there's an accordion, also violin. It's not a set instrumentation, but they do play a particular style of music that tends to start slow and then get fast, almost like gypsy music in some ways. And it is particularly associated with the Jewish community in Europe, of which Poland had the largest share of Jewish population prior to World War II, prior to the Holocaust. Anybody know what the Jewish population of Poland was? About 3 million, correct, prior to the Holocaust. And then how many of the Polish Jews survived World War II? Anybody know any numbers there? About 200,000. About 200,000 out of 3 million survived. Okay, so because Poland had the largest population of Jews in Europe, for that reason, the Nazis set up most of their concentration camps in Poland. And so that's why that was done, because of the location strictly. But obviously, a huge issue in terms of historical changing of the face of Europe and the changing of the population. Anybody ever been to Poland? Anybody been to a concentration camp and seen it?
Auschwitz.
You went to Auschwitz? Uh-huh. I did too, in 75. When did you go?
2006.
06? Anybody else been to see one? Dachau. Okay. Where else? Anybody else been to one? Okay. It's a sobering experience because what you see, they have kept the concentration camps generally complete in terms of what was there when they found them. They have left places like the crematoria intact so that you tour those. But I think probably the most memorable thing for me in going through Auschwitz when I went through was the rooms full of personal belongings. Still there. Right. So there will be a room this size, for example, filled with nothing but shoes. Right. And then you go to the next room and it's filled with purses and pocketbooks. And then you go to the next room and it's filled with nothing but eyeglasses. A mountain of eyeglasses up filling the entire room. It's just overwhelming when you see all of that, the physical representation of all of these people who lost their lives in the Holocaust. So when you think about Klezmer and you think about Judaism, you can't help but think about what happened during this time to this population. So let's look first at klezmer music and what it is and what it brings to the table regarding the music of Central Europe. There's a great YouTube video that I want you to look at of Itzhak Perlman, the master violinist, playing klezmer with a group. Actually, in America, it's actually an American group, but stylistically, it's exactly what you would expect to find in Central Europe with this style. Let's listen to a bit of Perlman playing klezmer with. Much of the music that you're going to hear in this unit, particularly from Poland, is very familiar to us in sound. Particularly those of us that grew up in Western music tradition, European American type tradition, because there are regular phrasings in terms of symmetrical numbers of measures. So there will be, for example, 4 measures of an antecedent phrase and then 4 measures of a consequent phrase, right? So we'll have 4 measures of music that seems to ask a question, for example, and then 4 more measures of music that seems to give the answer. And you'll hear that in the klezmer. You also hear that, for example, of Polish Jewish music that's in your anthology. Okay, that regularity of phrasing is what I would refer to it as. Let me write that one down for you so you can get it in your notes. Regularity of phrasing, and specifically the use of what is known as an antecedent consequent structure. And you can think of it as question and answer. So if you go back and listen, for example, to some of the phrasing that the klezmer ensemble just played, you'll hear that kind of structure going on where there'll be a phrase which seems to ask a question. It actually ends on a 5 chord. And then there will be a similar phrase that kind of gives the answer, and it ends on a tonic chord. You don't need to know that 5-and-1 terminology for this class, but I do want you to know about the regularity of phrasing. Music of this region is typical for the improvisation to take place so that it's never quite the same twice. And I think that if you heard this klezmer group play the same thing again, it wouldn't be quite the same. It'd be different every time. So that's a good question. Okay? All right. Let's leave this material and go to a map and take a look more closely at the place that we're dealing with here. Okay, because what I want you to see, for example, is that Krakow is the biggest city in southern Poland. And you can see it there in the big letters on this particular map. And if you go straight south from Krakow, you will get to a town called Zakopane. It looks like Zakopane. It looks like Zakopane, but it's actually pronounced Zakopane. You'll find Zakopane, and that is listed in your text as one of the towns where they collected this music from Poland in what is known as the Podhala region. And the Podhala region has several little towns that are all in the mountains there, and Zakopane is one of them. And that's probably the most important area. But then, if you go back up to Krakow, and you move to the east, you move to the west, you will eventually run across a town called Ostwiecim, right there. That's the Polish name for Auschwitz. Auschwitz is a German word that the Germans tended to rename places in Poland because once they took over Poland, they basically assumed that they were going to have it for the rest of time. And so they tended to give their own names to things. But the Polish have gone back to the original name of that town, which is called Ostwiecim. And it's right there. That's where Auschwitz is. And again, it's a sobering experience to think of the number of people who lost their lives there. And when you look at the Jewish music that we're listening to in our example, who performed it? Has anybody checked on that? Let's listen to it. It's on CD 2, track 7. If you turn there in your CDs or you look in your text, you'll find that the title of the song, Oifen Pripyatchik, is an example of Jewish music from this area. And who performed it? Kevin Kelly at the University of California, Santa Barbara, 2006. Why was it that they couldn't get somebody from Eastern Europe to play it for them? Because none of them survived the Holocaust. Because anybody that survived the Holocaust and still knows how to play that music did so because they were able to immigrate somewhere else, like the United States. And so that's why to find performers of this music, you have to go somewhere outside Poland in order to do it. It's a pretty sobering thought when you think that to find music from this culture, you have to go somewhere else besides the place where it originated because of what happened during the Holocaust. Let's listen to a bit of this, and if you want to turn in your text to the lyrics, you'll find it on page 216 and 217. In the stove a little fire burns, and in the house it is warm, and the Rebbe is teaching children the alphabet. So you can see the lyrics there on 216 and 217. What I want you to listen for is the regularity of phrasing, the regularity of phrasing, the antecedent consequent phrasing that we just talked about and heard in the klezmer music. Listen for it happening in this song. This song is not, however, in duple meter. It is in triple meter. And we're going to see some different metric things going on in this unit. We've heard duple meter already in the klezmer, but now we're going to hear some triple meter, which means that there are 3 beats to the measure. And we're going to talk about what that means a little later. First, let's listen to a bit of Oifen Pripyatchik.
Oifen Pripyatchik brennt auf Feuer und in Sturm ist heiß. Und der Rebbe lernt kleine Kinder nach dem Aleph bis. Und der Rebbe lernt kleine Kinder nach dem Aleph bis. Seht ihr Kinder nach Sog noch einmal und Tage noch einmal, komm jetzt alle vor. Sog noch einmal und Tage noch einmal, komm jetzt alle vor.
Okay, what language is this in? It's not in Polish. Yiddish, which is what? What is Yiddish? It is part Hebrew and part German, right? It's a combination of Hebrew and German that is spoken in many Jewish communities. And that's the language that this is sung in. And if you look at some of the text, particularly the last line, children, when you grow tormented with the struggle of exile, looking to the letters of the alphabet, you will draw strength. What do they mean by exile? Exile from the Holy Land, from Jerusalem, right? Because the Jewish nation always felt like it was essentially in exile, and Poland for centuries was one of the places where the Jews felt the safest, where they were the most accepted of any place, because the Poles were very accepting of other nationalities, of other cultures coming in and being part of their nation. All of that changed, of course, because of the Holocaust. So you see the massive ramifications, not only culturally, but also socioeconomic. The whole thing changes considerably when something like that happens. So be aware of the implications of this song as you think about this influence on this area. Now let's go back and look at our second area of influence, Christianity, specifically the notation and also the chorale. Those are the two that your textbook talks about. Music notation actually came from the early church. Some of you may know this history, but why did they develop notation? Why did the early Christian church develop notation? Gregorian chants, yes. Okay, so these were named after a pope, Pope Gregory. He got basically the credit for having codified all of these chants that were being sung by the churches. And particularly if you lived in a monastery, if you were a monk, you would be chanting these chants several times a day. Now, it was called at that time, it's referred to as the Catholic Church now, but what does the word Catholic mean? Lowercase c. What does the word Catholic mean? It means universal. Everybody doing the same thing. That's what it means. And so the idea was we really need to have everybody singing the chants the same way. And thus, notation developed specifically so that everybody in monasteries and churches all throughout Christendom would be performing the music the same way, and the same songs would have the exact same notes. That's why we have 5 lines and 4 spaces and do, re, mi. That's where it all came from, was the church's wish to make everybody be doing the same thing. So that's one of the things that it gave us. Then the chorale. The chorale is also very important because the chorale, particularly that developed by the Protestants during the Reformation, gives us this whole idea of regularity of phrasing and the antecedent consequent phrase structure that I talked about earlier today. And if you want to look at some of the ones in your textbook, they give you Joy to the World, well-known Christmas carol. They also give you A Mighty Fortress is Our God by Martin Luther, both of which are good examples of the European tendency to do regular phrase structure. Let's take a look at those real quickly so you can get a sense of what that means. If you look at transcription 5.3 on the bottom of 219, we get that same kind of regularity of phrase structure in A Mighty Fortress. Let's sing this so that you can get a sense of what I'm talking about. Ready? 1, 2, 3. A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing. Good. Stop there. What we've just heard is an antecedent consequent phrase. A mighty fortress is our God, right? It leaves you hanging. It can't stop there without telling you something else. A bulwark never failing gives us more information, and it also rounds out the phrase so that it ends on a tonic, basically, a tonic chord. And that's very important in European music because they really like to hear that antecedent consequent phrase structure that we've been talking about here. You're going to run into it more and more as we begin to look at this music. So going back to the PowerPoint then, we have the influence of Judaism, the influence of Christianity, and then third, the influence of Islam, which brings us what? Some instruments here. The guitar and the violin. Both come from the Islamic tradition, and they're going to be a very important part of the music that we're going to hear in this culture, particularly the violin, but the guitar as well. So 3 religions then influencing this style. I talked earlier about rhythm and meter and how we're going to see some different kinds of rhythms here. Duple meter implies that the measure is being divided into 2 parts. Sometimes it's 4. But generally, you're going to see the meter going 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay? Like we saw in, for example, A Mighty Fortress or in Joy to the World. You get a duple meter in that situation. And the pulse, the accent, is going to be on 1, on the strongest beat. And then if you have 4 beats to the measure, as we did in A Mighty Fortress, you're going to have another smaller accent on beat 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? You get a little bit more accent there. In triple meter, as we heard in Eufen Pripetschik, there is an accent on 1, but then there are 3 beats to the measure. So triple meter in this case. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. When you listen again to those examples, listen for those meters to be happening. Now, the third example of meter that we're going to see in this unit is an additive meter, also known as asymmetrical. Asymmetrical, and you'll find those terms on your PowerPoint. Those apply specifically to the Bulgarian music that we have on our CD. The example, Rushanica, is the example that you have on your CDs. And what I want you to do is to count with me the subdivision of a measure that would be set up in 2 plus 2 plus 3. Now, in an actual piece of music, you might see this written in 7/8 because there are actually 7 beats going on there, right? But they are subdivided into 2 plus 2 plus 3 beats. So you might see 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And notice that when I'm conducting that, I'm not conducting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Not doing that. I'm putting the accents right where the subdivisions lie. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So everybody get your conducting sticks out. Okay, just pretend you have a conducting stick. And we're going to do this counting. You're all going to count with me. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Ready? And 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Good. Now do 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 3. Ready? And 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Now, what happens when you get to the subdivision that has the 3 beats in it? You have to delay, don't you? Right? You have to delay your next downbeat so that you can make time for all 3 of those to happen. And so when you're conducting, the effect is short, short, long, short, short, long, short, short, long. Everybody try that. Just say short, short, long, short, short, long, short, short, long. Keep going. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Okay. That's the way this music is working, except that it's not going that slow. It's going 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, da 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 da. It's going so fast that I can't count 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Like, I can't keep up with it. I have to go short, short, long, short, short, long, short, short, long, short, short, long, like that. Everybody try that at that tempo. Ready? And short, short, long, short, short, long, short, short, long. 1 da 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 da. Okay. Now, see if you can apply that to the music from Bulgaria that's on your CD. And see if you hear that happening in this song, Rushanitsa, which is track 8 of CD number 2. First, you're going to hear the bagpipes warming up, because that's the instruments that are playing it. And then you're going to hear that rhythmic pattern start, and you should hear that short, short, long going on here. Pretty wild, pretty hard to keep up with if you're trying to conduct that. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, da 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 da. It's incredibly fast the way they're doing this music, but that is a Bulgarian style that's very, very common in their folk music. The Hungarian composer Bela Bartok was very famous for borrowing folk elements and putting them into classical styles. And so this composer, Bartok, whose name you see there in the PowerPoint, really made a name for himself by going around the countryside collecting folk music in Hungary, in his native Hungary, during the 1930s, the 1920s. And he would record it using early recording devices, like a wire recorder, for example, because it was before tape recording was even developed. After 1945, people would take a tape recorder out. But Bartok and his colleague Zoltán Kodály were going out and collecting these folk songs in Hungary in the 1920s and 30s using wire recorders. And that's where a lot of this music comes from. And then Bartok would later infuse that music into his classical styles. He was a piano a great pianist, Bartok was. And so a lot of his piano music has these kinds of Bulgarian rhythms associated with them. Here's one from his collection called the Microcosmos. And there are 6 dances in Bulgarian rhythm that happen in this movement. And I thought I would show you one of them and show you what it looks like. First of all, take a look at the time signature. It's got 2 plus 2 plus 3 over 8. Now he could have written simply 7/8. He could have done that because that's really what's going on. But he really wanted to show the subdivision from the Bulgarian style that was happening here. So he wrote it as 2 plus 3, sorry. Which one comes next? 2 plus 2 plus 3. 2 plus 2 plus 3 over 8 was what he wrote here. So what that means is that the 8th note is getting counted 7 times in that measure. So if we play that, it would sound like this. Okay, so you can hear 7/8 notes in that measure, and the subdivision 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 like that. Except that it's usually not played that slow. It's usually played like that fast. And then when we get to the next section, we get and then like that. That's how fast it goes. Very similar to the speed at which we heard the bagpipe ensemble going for the Bulgarian piece, the Rushanica, that's in your CD pack. In this case, Bartok transferred this concept into piano music, and thus the result was the dances in Bulgarian rhythm that are in Book 6 of the Microcosmos. We're going to see more of Bartok's music and how it relates to the folk music of this area as we begin to study Bosnian music that's coming up. We'll listen to some Ganga songs, for example, and hear some specific interval oddities, at least oddities to our ears, that happen in this style as we continue our study. So we'll see you next time.